Should your next car be a petrol, be a diesel, or a hybrid, or maybe a full EV instead? Well, I've driven a few of each of those, so I thought it'd be a good idea to have a chat about which one might be right for you, why you might want one over the other, and a bit of a talk of, I guess, where I see the industry heading in general. Now, it's absolutely freezing here in Britain, so I'm going to get in the car and talk to you from there. Right, that's much better. It's warmer and quieter in here, so let's get started. Now, the first one I want to start with is petrol. It's the one that a lot of people, including myself, are most familiar with, and that's because it's generally the cheapest, smallest beginner cars are all petrols. Now, of course, this will vary depending on where you are, but here in the UK, if you want to buy a small car, it's pretty hard to find a diesel version. Sometimes you can, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of Peugeot 108 and 208 diesels, but generally speaking, you look at a Mark II Renault Clio, which was my first car, that is going to be a 1.2, 1.4 petrol engine, and the same for a lot of the small car and cheap car options. Now, it's not only the sort of cheap beginner cars that you can buy that use petrol engines. In fact, the car that I'm sitting in now, my 2013 Audi S4, is a petrol engine. It's a petrol supercharged V6, and generally speaking, if you want a sporty car, whether it's a Audi S4, BMW M3 or M5, or even just a sporty small hatchback, even Golf R, anything even down the line, Golf GTI, most of those cars are generally going to be petrol, and they're generally going to be the more sporty options. Now again, there are plenty of caveats. The brand new S4 is a diesel, as is the new S6, and there is a GTD Golf and lots of other things, but generally speaking, if you are a car enthusiast, you want a performance, sporty, fun car, you like revving it out, then a petrol engine car is going to be your best bet. And lastly, depending on the engine and configuration, they can be reasonably economical. I had a Volvo S40, it was the 1.8 petrol, and it would do a good 400 miles to a tank, and it was about 50 or so litres, so not too bad. Of course, diesels are much better for that, but if you want an all-rounder, a sporty car that you can take on long trips, you could happily take around the Nürburgring, like this one, but would also be fairly economical to get you there and back, a petrol engine car is, normally speaking, your best bet. Now, if you want even better economy, then yeah, a diesel is a much better bet. Unfortunately, because of the way that diesel engines work, they don't tend to be as fun and sporty cars. The engines don't normally rev as high, the torque is pretty much low down, so you're short shifting almost every gear, and again, the power is generally on the lower end versus petrol engines, where you don't normally have to rev them out and get higher in the RPM range to really feel the torque and power delivery. The benefit of having a diesel is straight up fuel economy. Like, it is way better than petrol cars, and while the driving experience is a lot more muted, it's a lot more, I suppose, relaxed in a cruiser or, take you to work and back every day kind of way, it's still a very economical and still reasonably fun driving experience overall. Diesel cars also tend to have the ability to be really easily remapped to give significantly more power. Of course, petrol engines can too, but it's fairly rare for petrol engine cars to be getting hundreds of extra brake horsepower and torque figures rather, from a single remap. Of course, this, my 2013 Audi S4, is the exception, I suppose, that proves the rule. This is 330 stock, but if you remap it, it's 420, and if you change the supercharger pulley, it is 500 or 480. So, of course, that can happen, but most, say, 2 and 3 litre diesel BMWs can go from 160 or 180 horsepower up to 220, 250, and from about 250 to well over 300, all just with standard stock internals, stock turbos, and a remap. Generally speaking, diesels are for the everyday use type of, your daily car, the thing that will take you to work and back, take you to the other end of the country and back if you need to on a whim, and they're generally pretty bulletproof. Of course, it depends on the car and the engine, and there can be some fairly serious known faults with certain engines, but on the whole, diesel engines can very well last for multiple hundreds of thousands of miles without too much intervening, whereas with petrol engines, they tend to be more 100, 150,000 mile type engines, and then you need to think about replacing them or doing sort of full rebuilds to get some more life out of them. The main downside for diesel, beyond the slight lack of sportiness that you get, often things like turbo lag, especially on older BMWs, I've driven a few of them, when you plant your foot, you can literally count for 3 or 4 seconds before anything happens. So it's not great, but the other thing that you should consider is government regulation and effectively emissions crackdowns. A lot of different legislation is coming about that means diesel cars are either going to be banned from sale or potentially even banned from driving in the not overly distant future, so it could be worth considering if you're someone who likes to hold on to your cars for a very long time. Now, if you're after efficiency but you want the good graces of the government on your side, then a hybrid might be a good option for you. Now, the problem that you might have, or you might find, is that there aren't all that many hybrids on the used market. There aren't all that many models, especially that have been out for enough time for people to have sold them on and bought something else. And so generally speaking, if you're looking for a hybrid, you're looking for that efficiency while still not going fully reliant on a full EV and batteries only, then you're probably looking at buying new or leasing a new car. Now, of course, there are plenty of people who are in that market, and if you are, there are some good options. The one thing that I would note with hybrids is that generally speaking, especially from the ones that I've driven, they feel fairly disconnected from the road. I think it's a trend that basically the car companies are trying to insulate the drivers from the driving experience as much as possible. So most of them will have electric power steering, which will feel very, very, very light and floaty. You'll also have things like in the new Renaults that I did a first drive or first look on a little while ago, that the throttle pedal doesn't actually directly correlate to how much throttle you want to give it. Instead, it's a sort of one pedal driving experience where a little bit down on the throttle is actually zero throttle, and then if you lift all the way up, that starts actually braking the car, which is something, I guess, difficult to get used to, and especially on those Renaults, I felt very disconnected when I planted my foot. I wasn't sure that the car was actually going to do what I wanted it to do. Of course, the benefits of having a hybrid system are pretty obvious. You get significantly increased fuel economy and range, and while there is normally the downside of, because hybrid cars have to have a battery bank as well as a fuel tank, you normally have to sacrifice fuel tank capacity, which then means that while you are using less fuel over the same distance, you normally can't travel quite as far. To give you an example, the fuel tank in an A4 S4 is around 60 to 70 litres. I think this one specifically is 66, and it will generally get you 400 to 500 miles depending on the engine configuration. In the Renault Megane Touring that I tested a while ago, yeah, because of the battery bank, that only had a 43 litre fuel tank. And so while it can travel a similar distance thanks to the extra efficiency, if you were to compare similar sort of performance figures, so say a 2 litre petrol to the 1.6 hybrid that had, you're probably getting fairly similar, if not better range on the standard car thanks to the larger fuel tank. Of course, not everyone will care about that, and so if you are after some extra efficiency, you don't mind having normally a fairly, I guess, muted or anemic driving experience, then hybrids can be for you. They can be pretty expensive though. They're normally a significant amount more money compared to even the standard versions of the same car, so keep that in mind. And then we have to come on to full EVs. Now, for me, I see them as the future of motoring, and honestly, I think a lot of people do. It's fairly obvious to see that pretty much every car brand has at least one full EV on their docket right now, with plenty more on the way. Of course, there will be alternative options like alternative biofuels and hydrogen fuel cells, but on the whole, full EV and battery EVs specifically do seem to be the most, I guess, adopted and the most widely available right now. Of course, we can't talk about EVs without talking about Tesla. If you want the arguably best EV on the market, yeah, a Tesla Model 3 is your best bet, probably by a good margin. While there are plenty of other options, even Volvo's Polestar 2 is a seemingly decent option, it just doesn't quite keep up in terms of the battery tech, in terms of the motors, and in terms of the self-driving tech too. Now, of course, all of the Tesla lineup is still incredibly expensive, but the interesting thing is that there's still a whole load of options, even on the sort of 18 to 20,000 pound mark. The new Seat Me, the Volkswagen e-Up, those sorts of cars, obviously they're very similar since they're owned by the VAG group, but those sorts of cars are great. There's also the new Corsa electric and a whole load of other relatively low price options, and of course the VW's ID3 as well. The downside to electric, at least at the moment anyway, is infrastructure and pricing, and I guess range. In terms of the infrastructure, while there is a growing infrastructure across the world, it's still not quite there. There isn't charging points everywhere you look, and not everybody can park their car at their house. And so charging infrastructure built into the, say, pavements in residential streets would be a really nice addition, but unfortunately that just isn't quite there yet. If you can park your car next to your house and charge it, especially with a wall charger built into your mains, then that is a great option. It's way, way cheaper to run, and of course the much better for the environment aspect is definitely there too. When it comes to price, like I said, while it is cheaper to run, the initial upfront cost is generally a good bit more than any petrol or diesel counterparts. While you do get some benefits for going electric, including government grants and even a bit of extra straight line performance, they do tend to add a bit of weight, and so they can be a little bit more cumbersome to drive if you're looking for a sporty car. And generally speaking, they still don't quite stack up in terms of the overall package compared to petrol or diesel counterparts. And lastly, range can be a concern. Depending on what car you get, if you're buying a Tesla Model 3, then realistically, range isn't a problem. Not only do you have the Tesla supercharger network, but you also have 200, 300, 400 miles worth of range on it, depending on how you're driving and conditions, all that sort of stuff. So for the vast majority of people, that really isn't a big deal. Most of the journeys that most people do are well under 100 miles in a day, and so even the Honda E, which has I think 130 mile range, is going to be fine for most people. And then if you do want to do a longer journey, you could say rent a car instead. But if you do longer journeys on a regular basis, then maybe that could be a concern for you. There are a few other benefits, things like being able to use your car as a solar battery bank for your home. That's pretty cool. And also one of the interesting ones is because EVs have way less moving parts and can also regen brake, you generally have lower service costs too. You don't need to do oil changes. You often don't need to change your brake discs or pads for years longer than you would on a standard petrol or diesel or even a hybrid car. And so that can be a nice addition as well. Now, of course, most of the stuff that I've said in this video is personal preference, personal experience, and my own thoughts and opinions. And so I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. What car would, what type of, I guess, powertrain is right for you for your next car? Is it going to be a sporty petrol? Is it going to be an economic diesel or an extra economic hybrid, or maybe even a full EV instead? Do feel free to let me know down there. So there you have it. That's a bit of a synopsis on what type of, I guess, engine powertrain might be right for you for your next car. Of course, there is plenty more that we can chat about, so if you have any thoughts, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. If you want to see more videos like this one, and hopefully some upcoming reviews, then feel free to check out that subscribe button and the bell notification icon, and you can also check out some more videos over there as well to keep watching. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I will see you all next week.